Welcome to this review video today. We will be doing AP Human Geography, Unit 6, Cities and Urban Land Use. Hi, I'm Mrs. Jacoby, and the focus will be on how urbanization, land use, and economic processes shape cities. Our learning targets will be defining urbanization, identifying models of city structure, explaining the urban hierarchy, and analyzing urban challenges. Let's start out with what is urbanization? Urbanization is the growth of cities, which means an increase in population and is usually driven by rural to urban migration. Urbanization trends include more urbanized growth happening in developing countries than in developed countries, and where mega and metacities are increasing worldwide. You can see on the map the share of the population living in urban areas in 2024. You can see lots of areas that are very, very, very dark green, which means they are more urban than they are rural. Megacities are defined as 10 million people or more. Examples include Tokyo, Delhi, and Lagos, Nigeria. But there are lots of them in the world on the map, and you can see lots of cities that list as 10 million, with some of them closer to 60 million. We will be looking at site versus situation. Site is the physical features of an area. It involves climate and water. Situation is like relative location. Where does it sit in relation to other things, or other cities, or trade routes? Trade routes were very important early on in our history. It's not so much now because airplanes, highways, and rails move products and people very quickly now. The urban hierarchy goes from the tiniest of rural location and moves up through hamlets, villages, towns, cities, larger cities, giant cities, megacities, global cities. Global cities are cities that are very important in the world and in the world order, both in terms of economies and politically. Speaking of global cities, the most important cities in the world right now are New York, London, and Tokyo. You can see on the map that a lot of cities are listed as global cities and are becoming important. But the three most important global cities in the world, New York, London, and Tokyo, because of their impact on the stock market, banking, and culture. We measure cities in two ways in human geography. The first is rank size rule, and this generally occurs in the most developed countries that have full distribution of people in the country, where the top city is 2 times larger than whatever the second largest city is, 3 times larger than whatever the third largest city is. Based on the picture, you can see the largest settlement in the United States is New York City. To measure the second largest city, it would be 1 over n, the population of that next largest settlement. So the second largest settlement would be 1 over 2, or half the size, and that is Los Angeles. The second way we look at cities is called primate cities. In many states of the world, the largest city in that state is the largest city by far. If you look at London's 7.6 million people, it far outranks the second largest city in England at Birmingham at 2.3 million. Paris, 9.6 million, largest city in France. Marseille, the second largest, doesn't even make it to 1 million. So the primate city is the most dominant city in the country. Mexico City, 18.1 million, second largest city in Mexico. Guadalajara, 4.6. As the primary city, it is far the largest, most important, and most dominant in the country. Central place theory explains the distribution of cities, but it can also explain the distribution of services and markets. The larger of the settlements, whether it be a village, a town, a city, a megacity, or a larger settlement, the more services that exist there. As you move down through the urban hierarchy, each successive lower level has less services and markets than the one above it. Until you get to the tiniest little hamlets, there may be no services. So in central place theory, they use hexagons to show the markets around the city. Around the very large city is going to be a larger than the market around a very small village. So looking at the picture, the big red dot, that's a big city. So it's going to have lots and lots of services, while the kind of light green dots are villages, and they're going to have very few services. And what those people would have to do is they would just have to drive to the city to get whatever services they need. People who are living in the city don't need to drive to get services because they're right there. We are now going to look at the urban models that you are required to know for this class. We're going to start out with the Burgess model, follow it up with the Hoyt model, and then the Harris-Ullman model. These are the United States models. We will then look at your international models, which include Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asian models. Let's start with the Burgess model. It's a circular city zone model. The zones expand outward from the central business district. You can always identify the central business district by the tallest buildings. Land is expensive in the CBD, so buildings go up. The model almost looks like the von Thunen model, where the center is the market where all the people are. Outside the central business district in the Burgess model, you have a zone of transition where housing is mixed with industry. Outside of zone 2, you have a zone of independent worker homes, so you're starting to move into residential. Zone 4 is where you're getting into a zone of better residences, more single-family homes. And then in zone 5, you're getting into much larger homes, really out from the city, and works in a circular model around the CBD. In the Hoyt model, sometimes called the sector model, it's wedge-shaped growth. So it's not rings, but it's wedges like pie, and it follows transportation. It was designed around cities that have railroads or rivers or highways. The center, once again, is the central business district. And next comes zone 2, the transportation and industry zone. That's in the purple. Low-class residential sits right around transportation and industry. Zone 4 is the middle-class residential in the 3 wedges, kind of a dark green. And zone 5 is the high-class residential, where the rich people houses, the biggest houses are. The multiple nuclei model was created by Harris and Ullman, and it's a more expanded model. There are multiple center cities. You do have a primary CBD, but you may have a secondary CBD. Looking on the map, you see number 1 is the primary CBD, and number 7 is the secondary CBD. So you have multiple areas with high rises popping up. You have wholesale and manufacturing in zone 2. You have low-class homes in zone 3. Low-class or socio-economic or less economic areas always seem to surround industry and transportation. In zone 4, you have more middle-class homes. In zone 5, you have high-class homes. In zone number 6, there's heavy manufacturing, kind of on the outskirts of the city. Zone 8, you have suburbs. And in zone 9, you have an industrial suburb, so you have an industrial area sitting more apart from the city. This model contains multiple centers and contains specialized zones. The African city model reflects the colonial legacy of Europe dividing up Africa during the Berlin Conference, and these were original cities that colonizers took control, and it shows that. The center city, CBD, actually has 3 central business districts. You have the colonial CBD that the colonizer built. You have the traditional CBD, which was the center of the city before colonization, and then you're always going to have a market zone, like an open air market. These are fast growing towns. On the outskirts or the outside is where the poor live. On the American models, the poor are living in the city. In the international models, the poor live outside the city. A lot of African cities are becoming megacities. They're growing rapidly. There is nothing in us in the country. The only place they can get things done, jobs, services, schooling, is to move to the city. So they end up on the outskirts of that city living in ramshackle homes or tents, trying to find work. The Latin American model was modeled after Spanish cities in Europe. It contains a commercial spine. If you look at the picture, you see the center CBD with a market, and then a spine and a mall near the outskirts. Generally, this is a pedestrian-oriented area with shops and restaurants. Once again, in the orange ring around the outside, contains squatter settlements. Squatter settlements where the poor live are the same as in an African city. The poor are moving into the cities, looking for jobs, looking for opportunity. They cannot afford housing, so they live in the squatter settlements on the outside ring. Finally, the Southeast Asian model is a port-based development model because there are so many islands, so many bodies of water that the central area is based in a port. And then it kind of sprays out almost like a piece of pie. Now, in this case, the poor aren't living totally outside the model or off the edge because you have a market gardening zone. There is still farming going on around these cities because they're situated in less developed Asian states. You can see from the picture, you have mixed land use. You have government zones, you got high class zones, you got squatter settlements and middle density, all kind of mixed together. There's a lot of different groups, so this is more of a hybrid. There aren't any definitive, distinct zones. They're all more mixed up than anything else. There are also commercial zones, alien commercial zones. Those are for European and American companies in those areas. So it's a hybrid. It's mixed up, no specific zones as in the previous models. Urban land use laws and zoning is how governments determine where to build buildings. You can see in the very center, there's your central business district. And each color on this map is a different zoning. You could be zoned residential, or zoned industrial, or zoned commercial. Governments do this to ensure that certain areas remain viable economically, and they don't lose value if an industry tries to move into a residential zone. There's a lot of different specialty zones that are in American cities. For the most part, America has an issue with separate zoning, where you could only have residential here and you can't have anything else. Unlike in European cities, where they have mixed zoning, where the bottom of a building is a restaurant, or the bottom is a store, and then people live above it. This is called mixed zoning, very common in Europe. We don't have that in a lot of places in the United States, but it is beginning to happen, and we're starting to see more of it in cities to allow people to live and work in an area where they really don't need a car, and the cities are beginning to change. Many American cities are based on transportation, where you have to have a car to get around. Highways are generally built in poorer zones of the city, caused by leftover racism and something called not in my backyard, or NIMBY, where the rich people didn't want to be near the highways, so the government put the highways near in or around minority neighborhoods. The poor didn't have power to fight the government, so it ended up with the highways. Public transit was created to alleviate the heavy traffic in city limits, more buses or more trains to allow for less building of highways to stop urban sprawl from the city expanding to create a more centralized plan within the city itself. Suburbanization means suburbanization. Just take the sub off the front and you still see the word urbanization. If you live in the suburbs, you technically live in an urban area. So if you live in the suburbs or the city, you live urban. Unless you live out on a farm or in rural areas, you are living in an urban area. We have more people in the United States living urban than we do rural. Movement to the suburbs was basically helped along by the building of roads, good roads, so you could live outside the city and commute down to the city to work. It allowed people to buy bigger homes, have bigger yards, have more fresh air than being in a crowded city atmosphere. The, the only problem with suburbs is you have to have a car. You can't get there without a car. Urban sprawl goes along with suburbanization with low density growth outside the city limits. We're building outside the city in a not a very planned way. Developments here and developments built there, and there might be farmland in between. Eventually, it will backfill with more development. It causes environmental impact because all those unplanned developments are growing, and that's taking away farmland that we need to grow food. Gentrification is the changing of an area from rundown and low socioeconomic groups living in an area to wealthier residents moving in and fixing the area up, investing money in buildings and in various businesses, which causes costs to rise in the neighborhood. Property taxes rise, which will then eventually push out the poorer original residents. Redlining is a purely racist practice where banks refuse to loan money to minorities. They would literally take maps of the area and put red lines or red marker on areas where they were not going to lend money. It led to discriminatory housing policies. It led to long-term inequality in neighborhoods. It is illegal now, but at one time it was not. Urban challenges are growing today as more and more people want to live in the cities. Housing shortages are going to happen when more people are looking to buy or rent. This in turn causes land prices to rise out of the reach of many people. Traffic increases as more people move in, which leads to heavy congestion, increases in drive time before and after work. Heavy traffic also leads to increased pollution from car exhaust, and accidents and injuries increase too. City planners have to find a way to address this. A way to help cities with challenges is to try to create sustainable cities, putting in green spaces or parks, putting in public transit so cars aren't necessary, and creating smart growth plans to ensure that what is being built in the city is good for the city and not just sprawl for the benefit of developers or contractors building houses, but to the benefit of people who live in the cities. Let's look at some questions. Question number 1. Which model uses concentric rings? Is it A, Hoyt, B, Burgess, C, multiple nuclei, or D, Latin American? Which model would you choose? 10 seconds, go. If you answered B, Burgess, you are correct. Burgess uses concentric rings outward from the central business district. Question number 2. A primate city is A, the smallest, B, dominant city, C, rural area, or D, suburb. Take another 10 seconds. Choose the best answer from the choices given. If you chose B, the dominant city, You chose correctly. The primate city is always more than 2, maybe 3 times larger than the next largest city in the state. Question number 3. Urban sprawl is A, dense development, B, low density expansion, C, migration, or D, industrial growth. Take 10, choose the best answer. If you chose B, low density expansion, that is correct. That is developers outside the city just building random developments. And then you have development and then open space and then development, maybe a park, and they'll all eventually fill in. Finally, question number 4. The process of neighborhood change through the influx of more affluent residents and investment is A, sprawl, B, low density expansion, C, gentrification, or D, redlining. Take 10 seconds, choose the best answer. If you chose C, gentrification, you're correct. Bringing in affluent residents with investment to make an area better and cleaned up and increasingly livable, that is gentrification. Gentrification is great for people who are investing, not so great for original residents who are forced out. Let's do an FRQ question, and this question is discuss how urban models reflect economic patterns. Discuss means several sentences. I add examples anyway. I always believe in giving more in an FRQ. Discuss urban models and discuss the different areas. You got market areas, you got residential areas, you got squatter areas or squatter settlements or poor areas. All of that is based on economic patterns. You could talk about the Latin American model with the CBD and the commercial spine. Along high areas or low income areas, you could talk about many different models to pick one and discuss it and talk about how they reflect economic patterns. Know the key vocabulary for this unit, the definition of urbanization, know what megacities are, the central business district, gentrification, and how it affects the new residents and the old residents. And finally, what urban sprawl is and where cities grow unconstrained when there's no plan and just developers building to make money. The final review, cities grow due to immigration and the economy. If jobs are in the city, people are going to migrate there. If there is opportunity in a city, people are going to migrate. Make sure you understand the urban models and be able to explain the structure of each one and know that cities face social and environmental challenges. Be able to define urbanization. Know the urban models, know urban problems, pollution, traffic, congestion. Thank you for watching. The next unit is Unit 7, Industry and Development Patterns and Processes.